welcome to Tips for Searching Newspapers.com. And as she explained, this is one of the databases we have here at the Genealogy Center. And so a lot of people know even their local libraries have newspapers.com. So what we are going to be covering today is the product that you can access here or at your other local libraries. And there is also personal subscriptions as well that I can't speak to per se. So let's talk about these library ones. When you're here at the Genealogy Center, to get access, this is the genealogycenter.org site. And so you can click on the Explore Genealogy tab at the top of the screen. And when you do, it drops down and you could select our resources. Otherwise, a simpler way to do this is to actually go to the green box that's below the picture that says our resources. And either way, you get to this page. And this is about our databases. And so when you're here visiting us at the Allen County Public Library, you would see that we have paid to have access to newspapers.com, and you have to use it on site. So it's under those on-site databases. When on our on-site page, it's just going down alphabetically until you get to newspapers.com. When you first start searching in newspapers.com, you are probably going to want to just jump in and put in a name, and perfectly reasonable. And we all want to try that. But also keep in mind that newspapers.com also allows you to use keywords as well. So here is what the opening screen looks like for newspapers.com. And so you can do add a keyword or name. You can add a date or a date range as an option, and you can narrow your search by a specific location. So here for this particular example, we are actually going to look for Maddie Lanius. And one thing that is really great about newspapers.com is the fact that you can put those quotation marks around the name. And so you can look for the name Maddie Lanius, and I'm going to actually narrow this one down to North Carolina. When I do that, I have 7 matches. And so also on the right side of the screen, this is where you can limit your results. You can limit it by specifically by locations, such as here, because we already chose North Carolina. It is blue colored on the map, but those pink states are other states that have information. You can also narrow further down by dates, and it starts off with decades and you can keep narrowing down. So there's several ways that you can either search or search and narrow. When I first searched for Maddie Lanius in North Carolina, I searched for her name in quotations, in which I find an article that Mr. and Mrs. R.M. Connell and Mrs. Maddie E. Lanius spent Tuesday of last week in Raleigh. So this is an example of something that could be in a paper where it's something like people visiting each other, people going to see other family members and friends. These kinds of things appear in the paper. And as you can see in this particular example, it actually found Maddie Lanius with that E initial in the middle of it, even though I had her name in quotations. Then we have her son, Jack Lanius, in which it's talking about his obituary here, in which she is named as his mother, Mrs. Maddie Lanius. And then for her son, Ratcliffe Lanius, it's his obituary, where once again, she is named Mrs. Maddie Lanius. And so she keeps coming up because of the name we searched for. And once again, her own obituary, where she is listed as Maddie Lanius. And I wanted to show this to you because when we look for our females, we need to keep in mind not only the fact of them going from their maiden names to their married names, but their married names, depending on their circumstances, can impact how they appear in the paper. Maddie Lanius is appearing in the paper as Maddie Lanius in this time period because she is a widow. To be able to find her when she is married and her husband is living, we actually have to look for her using a different name. So Maddie Lanius is actually also Mrs. Jack C. Lanius or Mrs. J.C. Lanius. Because typically, historically, women, once they were married, they would appear in the newspaper as Mrs. and then their husband's names. And so in order to search for this female in a newspaper, we have to think of not only her actual name that we know, but we also need to consider the possibility that she's Mrs., her husband's name. And what do you do about initials? So here, just to show you, when searching for Mrs. J.C. Lanius, whether you put the space or not, but you do include the periods in the search, you come up with the same results in newspapers.com. But when you start to do it without the periods, you start to get fewer matches. So I wanted to point that out to you because a lot of our ancestors and a lot of newspapers used initials. So looking at those 69 matches for Mrs. J.C. Lanius, we find an article pertaining to Mrs. J.C. Lanius and her daughter, Miss Margaret Lanius, visiting friends in Raleigh. But we also found articles about Mr. J.C. Lanius, even though in our quotations is Mrs. Newspapers.com still went ahead and allowed that little wiggle room and did the Mr. as well. So out of these 69 matches, 45 of them were for Mrs. and 24 of the articles were for Mr. So these are things to keep in mind. It's not one simple way to search. You have to think of multiple ways to search. So you can throw a name in there, but you've got to think of those variants. And you've got to think of, with females, there are multiple name choices that you have to search for. Here we have an obituary for Captain X-Line. It says the following dispatch, and this is actually from the town of Fayetteville, but it's about a gentleman who died in the town of Pittsburgh. So it's a totally different location. So if I narrowed down the location all the way to the town of Pittsburgh, I might have missed this. This is saying that from Pittsburgh, dated August 4th, that this dispatch will be read with interest and sincere regret in Fayetteville, as Captain X-Line's wife was Ms. Maggie Poe, and she was the sister of our esteemed townsman, E.A. Poe, Esquire. And after a lingering illness lasting several weeks, Captain L.R. X-Line passed away this evening at 6:30 in his 69th year. Captain X-Line had been in Chatham since the close of the war, and no man had more friends than he. He was the Register of Deeds of Chatham County for 12 years, and at his own request, he was not nominated for a longer term. He is survived by his wife and daughter, Mrs. J.C. Lanius. The funeral will be held Thursday evening, and so forth. So from here, we find things like his wife's maiden name, her brother. We get Maggie's husband's information, Captain X-Line, who died. their daughter is Mrs. J.C. Lanius. So even in this article, Mrs. Maddie Lanius, the daughter of Captain LRX Line, her actual given name is not put into the obituary. It's her husband's name. For those of you who aren't familiar with newspaper searching, you might not realize how much really is given in a newspaper article, because I'm sure many of us would not be pleased with these kinds of articles being provided about us. Mrs. J.C. Lanius was carried last Friday to the Rex Hospital at Raleigh, and yesterday afternoon an operation was performed on her. The operation was for appendicitis. This was February 28, 1912. Basically, almost a week later, her many friends will be pleased to know that the condition of Mrs. J.C. Lanius, who underwent an operation at Rex Hospital last week, continues to improve. Another week later, there's a notice that we are pleased to note that Mrs. J.C. Lanius continues to improve at the Rex Hospital at Raleigh and is doing as well as could be expected. Then almost 2.5 years later, we are told we are much pleased to learn that Mrs. J.C. Lanius is expected home this afternoon from Raleigh, where she had been for 3 weeks for medical treatment. She is much better and in hopes of a permanent recovery. So these are the various types of things that can appear in these articles. So when you say you want to know details about your ancestors' lives, this is a great place to find those details, to go through these articles and to actually go through and read them and see what was going on. But when searching for Mrs. J.C. Lanius, we also have here an article pertaining to her son, the Radcliffe. Here it's actually, for some reason, Radford Lanius, but his actual name is Radcliffe. It's a marriage announcement for him, in which, once again, she is named as his mother as Mrs. J.C. Lanius. So in all of these different newspaper articles about this woman, she is not named under her given name of Maddie that we saw earlier. She is actually listed under her husband's initials. As for her husband, Jack C. Lanius, also known as Mr. J.C. Lanius, there were 59 articles pertaining to Jack Lanius in North Carolina. Of those articles, one of them, this one here, for example, is actually not about her husband, is actually about her children. Here is Jack C. Lanius Jr. and Radcliffe E. Lanius, who were in the School Roll of Honor from Pittsboro High School in 1919. And the next article from 1922, Mr. and Mrs. Jack Lanius of Bethune, South Carolina, have been here on a short visit to his mother, Mrs. J.C. Lanius. So some of these articles actually were not about Maddie Lanius's husband, but rather about her son, who had the same name as his father. Looking for Jack C. Lanius or Mr. J.C. Lanius, once again with those initials. If you use the periods, doesn't matter about the spacing, you get the same matches. And this time it actually, even with without the periods, if you had the spacing, it came up with the same matches again. But if you don't leave any spaces and don't have the periods in there for the initials, it does alter your results. So please keep that in mind when you're searching for someone who uses initials. You can search for a keyword. This family actually owned what was called the X-Line Hotel in North Carolina. And so you can search for an event or family business and such. So for this one, there are 53 matches for this particular hotel in North Carolina. Going through some of these records are advertisements, but some of them actually talk about the family. When you get your results page, you can actually look at the citation to see the name of the newspaper, where the newspaper was located, And once again, sometimes it helps to be able to not narrow it down per se to a specific town, just to see what other surrounding areas might have picked up articles. Gives you the date. And so this example here, it is saying there are 1 of 3 matches on this page. So when looking at the actual image itself, one of the first things you start to notice is the fact of the yellow highlighting. And so because you're searching for specific words, it's telling you with that yellow highlighting the words that you have found. So here we have the fact that Mrs. J.C. Norwood is preparing to give a big Thanksgiving dinner at the X-Line Hotel, and see the ad in another column. So if we were really interested in this, we could zoom in, zoom out using the controls on the far right. We can print or save this image. But at the top here where it says 1 of 3 matches, we can click on the arrow and it will take us to the next highlighted area. So when doing that, when we click on 2 of 3, we move over to the next part of the newspaper page that has the name that we are looking for. Because the name is somewhat separated, this is matched to the X-line part, and match 3 was hotel. So even though it's in quotations, it did start breaking it down further. So these are little algorithm oddities for you to just be aware of. It's great to be able to do the quotation marks to search for things, but just keep in mind that like there's actually only 2 matches on this page rather than 3. So once again, this here is that advertisement for this big dinner that they're going to have for Thanksgiving. Looking further from information about the hotel, we get things like Pittsboro had the greatest surprise sprung on it Saturday night. And this is actually from a Raleigh, North Carolina paper reporting news from Pittsboro. So it's saying had a great surprise sprung on it Saturday night that has for years when Mrs. L.B. X-Line, proprietor of the X-Line Hotel, and J.C. Norwood, a former boarder, slipped out the back way from a house full of boarders and were quietly married at the home of Mrs. J.C. Lenius, daughter of the bride. Reverend Jonas Barkley, pastor of the Presbyterian Church, performed the ceremony. And immediately after the ceremony was over, the boarders were on and armed themselves with rice. And upon the return of the happy couple, who still thought their secret wasn't out, were met at the front porch with showers of rice. This is just to show you how if you don't narrow down the location, other newspapers might pick up the articles. And so here you can get some of these details again. And here we have, once again, we're searching about the hotel. So it has articles about what's going on with its proprietor. Next one is actually a Pittsboro newspaper that talks about Mrs. Margaret X-Line, age 65, and J.C. Norwood, age 42, were married at the X-Line Hotel last Saturday night. So a little different location. Her pastor, Reverend Jonas Barkley, performed the ceremony, talks about Mrs. X-Line is the proprietress of the X-Line Hotel, which is well known in Pittsboro, and she has many friends and so forth. So it's once again describing the fact of them getting married. Here, once again, is another article about the hotel. This is from Durham, North Carolina newspaper, but it's giving a notice from something from Pittsboro in which Mrs. Margaret X-Line Norwood, 83, one of the oldest residents of Pittsboro, died at her home here this morning at 9:30 following an extended illness. Mrs. Norwood was the widely known as manager of the X-Line Hotel here for many years. Funeral services will be held at the Presbyterian Church by the Reverend Jonas Barkley. So it goes on, but it does say at the end, Mrs. Norwood is survived by one daughter, Mrs. Maddie, and it misspells her name, Ladiu of Pittsboro, instead of Linnaeus. But once again, you can find this by searching for X-Line Hotel. And then here is actually just an article in Durham, North Carolina about the selling of the hotel, where you get all these details about the actual physical structure, which is fascinating because the structure no longer exists. And so to be able to actually learn the physical description of what the hotel was like back in the day, there's actually that kind of detail in the newspaper. So even though there is no other kinds of records pertaining to the business, this is very beneficial for family history. Using those family names, just to break it down, in 1921, Maggie was still listed as Mrs. L.R. Exline, though Mr. Exline had died in 1909. And those initials are LR in his obituary and not LB, as in Maggie's second wedding announcement. In 1922, following Jack's death, Maddie appeared as Mrs. J.C. Lenius, and continuing on nearly a year later, she started to be put in the newspaper as Mrs. Maddie Lenius. And then in 1922, Jack Lenius Jr. dropped the junior following the death of his father that year when he appeared in newspaper articles. And so this is just to break down just how people with the name structures, how as the generations keep changing, as individuals are like women are becoming widows and so forth, how it changes their names in newspapers. So this is something to consider, to search for all the potential variants when you are searching in newspapers.com. So searching for other family members can really benefit us when doing a search. So here we're looking for a marriage announcement along the border of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And so for that, we search for Lottie Tennant in quotation marks. We're given 53 matches, which is pretty reasonable. We can narrow down by the states. Pennsylvania is completely grayed out. So because of that, we're going to focus on West Virginia then. Looking through some of these articles, like the first two articles here, they look like list of individuals. And so it's kind of like questionable that would be something pertaining to the marriage. Continuing down though, found an article that looks more in line to something pertaining to a marriage. So just by looking at that little snip of the article, you can start to narrow down your actual newspaper search. And which this one was, license issued, Thomas Watson of Pennsylvania was marrying Lottie Tennant of Worthington, West Virginia. So searching for her spouse, Thomas Watson in West Virginia, resulted in 979 matches. That is way too many. So we know now from the other article that they were married in 1912. So can actually type in 1912 to narrow down the date, which gives us 23 matches. We can click on a calendar next to the date that the year we typed in. And when we do, we get the actual calendar option. When we click on that, we are given our year and we are given the blue outlined boxes for the months that actually have articles. So the gray shaded ones like July, October does not have any articles pertaining to Thomas Watson, but the other ones that have the blue highlighting around them like March through June and so forth do. So we're going to select February and we can add a range because notice the date ranges. There's actually for February only articles for February 1st, 2nd, 14th, and 22nd. So we can actually do an actual range and select the date range we're interested in. This still led to 5 matches. And so here is the one that we've already seen, but lo and behold, exact same newspaper, exact same date, but on a different page. Here is an article pertaining to the wedding of Thomas Watson of Washington, Pennsylvania, and Lottie Tennant of Fairmont, in which it lists all the individuals who attended the wedding dinner, which includes Mr. and Mrs. Ben Clem, Thomas's sister at Fairmont, who actually hosted the marriage dinner, and so forth. And all these individuals, where they're from, these individuals being invited to this wedding tells us that there is some connection with these people. So we would want to keep track of all these individuals because, especially the family relations, because we might need to search for them at another time. When searching for Lottie for that same time range in West Virginia, there is still only one match for her name. And it's the same actual result we had gotten at the beginning. So that article we just saw with the fact that she was getting married to Thomas Watson, talked about the wedding, talked about all the people who were at the wedding dinner, even though her name clearly is in the newspaper article, for some reason she was missed in the indexing. This happens, unfortunately. Not all indexing is perfect, unfortunately. This is why searching those other family members' names is so critical and so important. And this is just a prime example how she was clearly in the article and yet she was not indexed. Using other details when searching in newspapers.com. So Mary Taylor divorced her husband in the 1950s, but she lived in the 1950s in San Francisco, Fresno, and Los Angeles. So that's a lot of places to try to see if there is some newspaper announcement pertaining to her divorce. So searching by her name, Mary Taylor in quotations, and the word divorce, and then starting off with the location of California is a good way to at least get an idea of how to narrow this down. So I'm using a name, I'm using a keyword, and a location. And boy, 4,400 results. That's a bit much. So narrowing it down, because we know it was in the 1950s, we scrolled down to the dates with matches. And so we can narrow down 1950s, which is 289 results. Still not the greatest. So we can start to try narrowing down by locations because we have 3 locations we know of. So you could narrow down by the locations. Los Angeles County had 90 results, Fresno had 32, and San Francisco actually had none. So decided to go with the lower number first. So started with Fresno County. And going through this, using those SNPs again, can start to see things, because here's another key element that you couldn't put as a search term, but it helps you when you're viewing this. That Mary Taylor and her husband had 1 child together. The first one here that we're seeing, this 3 children, we know that is not a possibility. Going to the next one, it looks like it's listing people talking about grandchildren, sounds like an obituary. We can rule this one out. The next one here, this is a possibility because they state it's about a child. So that's a possibility for us to consider. Continuing down, once again, this is a possibility. It says minor child instead of children. Continuing on, this is just a listing of a radio schedule. Now, every 10 results, you wind up with this bar that tells you to click to show more results. So you need to do that to get the next set. Here we have, once again, more divorces, but there's no real detail here for me to differentiate. So another possibility. So looking at this particular one, let's take a look at it. This one says as 1 of 2 matches on this page. And so I put Mary Taylor in quotation marks in the word divorce. Based on the algorithm though, no matter what, it kept coming to that word divorces and divorce that you see highlighted on the page. The 1 of 2 matches and the 2 of 2 matches was for that generalized word I had in my search parameter and not the quoted words. These are just those idiosyncrasies you should be aware of, but you should continue trying variant searches. Looking at some of those other ones, like the example here, when we take a look at this one, we find Mrs. Mary Taylor asked for the custody of a child and the division of the community property, including the equity in a dwelling, and a divorce action against Dwayne Taylor. The couple was married in Reno in 1950, and she charges cruelty. So based on this is actually the correct one. Being able to skim through 32 results and coming up with 3 potentials leads to the one actual result. And so using those little snips and just paying attention to the surrounding details can help you, so you don't have to go through the entire page. Here we have Robert Watson. We are going to be searching for a marriage announcement for him. If we click on the little globe icon under add a location, we're curious if they possibly have newspapers that would cover the area where Robert lived in England. Because newspapers.com not only has newspapers pertaining to the United States, if you click on the actual little arrow there, you can see other countries or other regions to consider. Selecting United Kingdom, it breaks down England, Wales, so forth. Just searching for Robert Watson in quotation marks, once again having the extra keyword of married, figuring the article will say Robert Watson married so-and-so, and then searching for the date of 1824 and knowing that it took place in England. We get 4 matches. So the funny thing is, out of those 4 matches, it's actually in Tyne-and-Wear County. So the 3 out of the 4 matches is from the area that we are considering for the marriage announcement. So looking through the results, well, first off, result number 1 and result number 3, based on the surrounding words in that snip, it's a good thing to guess they're talking about something about bushy tail, 4 legs, and so forth, but those are not the articles that we're looking for. So we'll go for the one that's the second option, in which here is a listing of individuals who were married. And here we have on the 22nd at Stockton, Mr. Robert Watson, mariner, to Anne, the second daughter of Mr. John Bulmer of that place, sailmaker. And so this is the marriage announcement for this couple for 1824 in England. You can definitely search other countries. And once again, you can search using details you are aware of pertaining to the family. You can also search by the location. So here we have Josie Plant. And Josie Plant was living in Opelika, Alabama, and she died somewhere in the late 50s. And so trying to find information about her, started by looking for her name, because this should be an easy search. So unfortunately, it says that there is no matches, but I know for a fact that she lived in this particular town, in the town of Alabama, and I know that she died in the late 50s. So continuing to try to search, trying other variants, not using quotations, looking for Josie Plant obituary instead without quotations, still no results. Couldn't find a page that had the word obituary, Josie, and Plant somewhere on the page itself. Decided to search for Josie Plant funeral, and once again using the same dates and location. Using that term, Josie Plant and the word funeral instead, I got 5 matches. So I've kept the date range, the location the same, but the only thing I kept changing was the name and the keyword. So among these 5 matches, I still didn't find an actual funeral notice for her. So looking for Plant funeral, using the date range, using the same location, 538 matches. Boy, that is a lot. But thankfully, for some reason, it actually pulled on the first page. The first page has an article where the name, it looks like the beginning of an obituary, and it's not the actual name I was looking for, Josie, it's Josie Plant. In which we get here, Josie Plant, funeral services will be held for Mrs. Josie Plant. We're told who's going to be officiating, and we're told that her survivors include her one son, Moses Lumford of Opelika, and her sister, and so forth. The thing is, because I know her son's name, I know that this is the correct person, but her name is Josie. So knowing that misspellings, if you are positive that the person should be there, try all kinds of variants or try other family members within that location. So searching for Josie Plant, same time period, same location. No results. This is just to show how, for some reason, Josie was not indexed, but her surname was. That was how I was able to find the article. This is to show you, you need to think outside the box and try to search using variant details. So you can find by location, in which you get a breakdown where you can search by country, then by state. You can search by the city. And then we see here, there are 10 newspapers. Or you can actually just on the main page, go ahead and search for the location that you're interested in. So this family was in this region in Opelika, Alabama for a very long time. And the way the names have been spelled over the years has been complicated. And among the 10 newspapers, needing to know how to find the family, knowing that there is a newspaper that features this family, possibly in the late or mid to late, in the mid 20th century, I'm going to look for her son, Moses Lumford, in that particular newspaper only. So I get one match in which it's that obituary we just saw for his mother. But looking for the name Mose Lumford instead of Moses, I got 2 matches, in which in those matches, I actually learned the birth announcements for his daughter, Moselle Linda Lumford, and the birth announcement for his daughter, Ellie Mae Lumford. When I searched for Moses Lunsford, which is actually the spelling that I knew, I get one article, but the article is someone has clipped it as an obituary. So I had searched for Moses Lunsford. The article itself is actually for Mose Lunsford. And I get the breakdown of the family members, including those children who we saw their birth announcements. And when I look for Mose Lunsford, I get 11 matches. So when I drop the S, I get 11 matches, including one for his daughter, Josie May Lunsford, and it names him and his wife. One for him. One where his wife and his children are thanking those, an administrative notice for his estate, where his wife is the executor, and a thank you notice from his wife and children for people who were kind at the passing of Mose Lunsford. So these are the kinds of articles that you can get on the family, but look at the way we had to search for his name, all the variants we had to do to be able to find information. And finally, I want to show you, for those who find an index to an article in newspapers.com, such as the citation that some of us find on Ancestry. So here is the citation on Ancestry where it says here, William Watson, and it looks like it's a marriage announcement. So this is the detail information, but if I go and look at the source instead, the source citation actually tells me the newspaper, the date, and the location. So with those details, I can actually go to newspapers.com, go to the papers, and type in the name of the paper, the Cambria Freeman. Once I do, I am looking for an article from 1895. And so I can see here that with the dates, 1867 to 1897, that this is going to be available to me. And so I can search within this paper directly from the box indicated here. And so I can search for William Watson. I get 8 matches, but I have the date from that citation of November 22nd, 1895, in which I get that marriage license announcement for William Watson. You can have a citation pop up like this, where you'll once again want to go to the source. And this is for an obituary for Peter Watson. And in the source, we are told once again the newspaper and the date and location. And so we're going to look for the Pittsburgh Press by going to the papers again at newspapers.com and putting in Pittsburgh Press. And we're looking for April 7, 1978. The dilemma is the library edition that is available at this time does not provide access to those years. This is where having a private account at that point can benefit you. Not to say, why not take advantage of the free by going to the Genealogy Center, Allen County Public Library, to access newspapers.com. But push comes to shove, you can have a personal account. Looks a little different, but you can go to the upper left corner to the 3 lines. And there you can search all publication papers. And once again, put in Pittsburgh Press. And notice the years are now covered for 1884 to 1992. So under that account, we could view the newspaper article. So we'll search for Peter Watson. And we'll search for 1978 since we have the date. And we find here, it's actually the obituary for his wife. He's mentioned in her obituary. I hope you have learned today how to search newspapers.com by searching and filtering using names, keywords, dates, and locations. I hope I've stressed the importance of looking for other family members and using other known details, and that I've shown you how you can move from an index to a newspaper article. Are there any questions?
There are questions. There are several questions, several which I'm going to try to group together.
Okay.
Just because they're kind of similar. So there were a couple of people who were saying that they have names that are commonly other things, like sandals or price. You know, how would you search for those necessarily newspapers.com without getting hundreds of ads for shoes?
Right. By doing the quotations is the better option when doing that, because otherwise, yes, you are going to wind up with a lot of various obscure articles just because of those variant words. So that's where I was really excited when the quotations became available, because it does narrow that down where you're not getting all these weird.
Yeah. Well, and somebody did ask, did you say that you mostly put things in quotes?
I do now that newspapers.com had started permitting that. I have, because the fact that if there's like that little, where it's a little off with the initials and such, it will catch it. But if I'm still not finding what I'm looking for, or I think that there should be more there, then yeah, I will go through a lot of articles and just you do the broad search. But yeah.
For your example with the X-Line Hotel, is there a way to filter out the ads? I mean, by saying like not whatever.
Unfortunately, there's not a way to filter them out. And it's not even just ads. They were with the visitations. So people would say that they were staying there. And so you had all these articles about people staying there that you had to weed through. But
well, I can imagine you're also going to see classified ads too when they're hiring. All
kinds of things. My name's Tennant. So searching for Tennant, that's one of the key reasons why I love the quotes now, because I was finding all kinds of stuff about, people who were renters or living on a property, or all kinds of things that weren't, well, what I was actually looking for a name. So
I am putting in the chat our email address, because I did see at least one person asking our contact information. If you have more questions, or if you would like a copy of the chat, I'm sure some people really enjoy having copies of the chat, send us an email to genealogy@acpl.info and we'll get that straightened out. Oh, this is kind of funny. Melissa must get lots of Doctor Who articles after a certain date. Yes. That's funny. Let's see. So somebody was asking if the attached to Ancestry feature works when you're using the library edition. I tested it and it worked for me. You have to log into your Ancestry account, but you'll see a screen at a certain point saying, sign in with Ancestry, or it will give you a couple options of how to share it. Does capitalization matter?
No, capitalization does not matter.
Well, what about apostrophes like O'Brien?
Yeah, that's sort of like the whole thing with the periods and not the
Yeah.
periods and the spaces. So yeah, you do have to kind of play with that, unfortunately. I have a lot of ancestors who used initials like just in their everyday,
Yeah.
and they show up on the census, they show up on all kinds of records with their initials. And yeah, unfortunately, you've got to just play with the alternates, trying to see what comes up.
There was a woman who I was doing research on for a while where she'd often appear in the newspaper as just Mrs. Moore.
Mhm.
So after a certain point, I started even searching Mrs. Moore in quotes to see if that would give me even more. And it does, but you'll also get a lot that is not,
Right.
still not related. Yeah.
The whole point is there is not one perfect way to search.
No.
You've got to search all kinds of variant ways and using those variant details.
Absolutely. Does newspapers.com now belong to Ancestry? Did Ancestry buy newspapers.com?
Yeah, they're under
Yeah,
the
they're
same
owned by
umbrella.
Ancestry. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can, on the personal account that I have, I don't have a login for the personal account. I log in using my Ancestry account because
Right. Yeah, I do too.
because I have both accounts.
Someone was asking, can you speak about OCR? And another person was saying, can you see the OCR text of a clipping in the library edition?
Yes, you can see the OCR clipping or text in the clipping. But OCR of newspaper print is very problematic because of the print's font, the different things pertaining to the different ways they used to do the typesets and such, and of course damage to the papers before they were ever scanned. Yeah. So OCR of newspaper articles with all the variants is very difficult. I actually had considered, I should have done it. I had an example from a German paper in St. Louis, Missouri, and that actually had the old German script font that was used in the paper. So I just was like, I can't even imagine OCR.
Yeah. Yeah. OCR can be both a blessing and a curse at the same
Correct.
time, because it can be so close, but then also so far off.
Right.
Yeah. So, but there are ways, you can trick the OCR, which you talked about some of those ways of doing that. Of you're essentially tricking an algorithm,
right? Because
OCR is not as smart as we would want it to be.
Exactly.
But it's getting better. It's getting better, I think, at least. Let's see. How realistic is it to look for newspaper articles in the US and England and other countries? I think you showed some examples for England.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I kind of want to say that don't just use one database.
Definitely not. No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Because look at those years or those dates that are being covered. Because when you actually are looking at the date ranges and you see like they're missing months, they're missing, 5 days, and it's not a weekly paper, that starts to tell you that they may not have the entire, or they might not have a big range of the paper kind of thing.
Right. And I know for US papers, there is the US newspaper directory on the Library of Congress's website. So if it hasn't been digitized anywhere that you can find, you can see where is it on microfilm. And also talk to those local libraries, the libraries in the locations that you're researching, because those librarians, they work with those materials all the time. So they should know, or be able to point you in the direction of where to find them.
And I know people hate hearing me say this, but I've got to tell you, it's worth it. If you know the family is in a certain region, you have access to those papers through newspapers.com and such, browsing the paper.
Yeah.
because of the fact, look at those search results and how I even used the words that are in the paper and they still didn't come up when doing a search.
Right.
It happens. And the Opelika example was a great one because it was actually an African-American family in that region that I was researching. And just the so many variants of the spelling of the name, but also just because of how the way, as you saw, like colored births and like this massive list, and just how all these articles were done. If I was just searching, I wasn't finding stuff, but browsing, because I knew the family was there. It was a community. I knew the family was there definitively. I actually found lots of articles that just unfortunately I would not have found via index.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences where I would be not finding ones. One paper in particular, which was it was a newspaper in Louisiana that was partially in French, partially in English. So you have these short articles where in French, where right below it, you'll have the translation. OCR could not figure it out. They could not figure it out. It was horrendous. So I ended up finding all kinds of stuff just by browsing the pages. Thank God it was at the time frame I was researching, the paper was not solely French anymore. But even if it was, I could at least identify surnames and then figure it out from there. But yeah, when in doubt, try browsing. If you're kind of at a point where you're not finding much, there's probably something there.
Right.
So we are almost out of time. I'm just going to remind everybody that if you would like a copy of the chat, if you have more questions, send us an email. Our email is genealogy@acpl.info. This program is recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel at some point. I'm going to put the link to that in the chat as well. And we have time for one last question. If you want to share a newspaper article with someone who does not have newspapers.com, will the other person be able to get that information without having to subscribe to newspapers.com?
Go ahead and save the article. One thing with newspapers.com is when it saves, it actually does the article citation minus the page number. I always have to remember to type that in to the file name, but you can save the image and then you can send the person that image. You can save the image as the entire image of the entire page of the paper, or you can just do a section of the paper. And like I said, the actual citation for the paper minus the page number is actually the file name that newspapers.com creates.
Great. Well, thank you again, Melissa, for such a great program. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Like I said, if you have more questions, send us an email to genealogy@acpl.info. And I hope all of you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.